So we are lucky to have lots of expertise in the state. So the goals for this one are to look at how the Maryland CS standards relate to cybersecurity. And I love that little note that the words secure and security show up 43 times in the Maryland computer science standards in some very interesting ways that people need to describe what it means. It's not just meeting the standards, it's a basic literacy, just like our basic goals in computer science. And one of our missions always in our CS for All Act is to broaden participation into all these areas. And while we're doing this, we want to develop local expertise and local resources so that we're using things made in Maryland and building up facilitators that can keep running these things to make this sustain as something that we do always. So our results would be that more kids choose those kinds of pathways, but also that we have an informed population that understands what this is. So a certified teacher for secondary education might actually have to teach a cybersecurity course. So they might need to know a fair amount. An elementary teacher would need to know just enough to cover the Maryland standards, which we'll see doesn't run too deeply in elementary. Everybody loves to do the job demand thing, so I left this one in here from last time. So if you throw together DC, Virginia, and Maryland, we're like this hot source of very high demand for cyber. So it's also where a lot of the funding is, we know. There's a lot of facets, and people keep describing both computer science and cybersecurity as very different things. There are a lot of soft skills that are involved in that framework that defines what you need to know to get a cybersecurity job. Things like problem solving and awareness of what's going on. The hard skills kind of classes is what most of the districts think that they're interested in right now. They want to have a sandbox, they want to have a cyber range, they want their kids to do penetration testing and hacking and all those kinds of things, but they aren't aware of what the knowledge is that goes with some of that stuff in the background. The new cybersecurity workforce framework is out there for review. It would be wonderful if those of you with some background, it's open for what, another week maybe, to take a look. It was intended as an intro level cybersecurity course. It's aligned up the same way that they did for the CS principles with essential knowledge, learning objectives, and big ideas. And so it kind of describes the results of having polled a bunch of university and community college people to say, what do you wish that people knew coming into those programs? So when we go to different sessions, like at NSA, the focus is really more on people understanding why cybersecurity is important and how to keep their own information secure. When we look at the standards, the things that kids need to know to fulfill the requirements for the standards are about what are computing devices, how do they work, what are networks and how do computers communicate, what is cybersecurity, and what are some of the different problems. So like so much of what we're doing, there's this big wide base that's for everybody and a lot of knowledge that builds up on that in the middle. And finally, a little bit that's for the experts that maybe are those kids that go into the CTE pathways and take a 3 or 4 year course that specializes in cyber, which more districts are trying to do. So if we look at these different areas that fit into the standards, if we look at K through 5, what should every kid know? Right? Basic literacy is 5th grade. The Reader's Digest is written to a 5th grade reading level. So we should get everybody to a 5th grade level on everything to do with these topics. So in kindergarten, they should be able to use a computer. In 1st and 2nd grades, they look at different programs and pick the right one. And getting to 3rd grade and 4th grade and 5th grade, they look at how the parts of computing systems work, what they're called, and maybe even make a model and talk about how they kind of work together and depend on each other. So understanding the hardware is in the devices standards. In the hardware and software section, there's the part where they start out very basically, you can see in the lower grades, just identifying what the parts are called and what they do. And then later on, they talk more about how the parts work together and how the information flows through it. So this should be part of any teacher prep program, since everybody should have that foundational literacy. and be able to have conversations about those pieces. And feel free to jump in anytime if you want to point something out or tell me something you thought of. In the other topic areas, networks and cybersecurity, in the network section, it's from obviously basic recognition that there is communication. Some of it is physical, some of it's wireless, what the different pieces are. And then they actually get into the point in 4th and 5th grade where they talk about how information flows on the internet and gets chopped up into packets and put together again at the other end. And that is something that should be foundational knowledge for everyone. In the cybersecurity side, there's a big emphasis in the early grades about strong passwords, obviously. And then it moves up to talk about some of the problems and their own information and how they should be keeping it safe, which makes sense as the emphasis in elementary. And I don't know how much it has to be continued as they get a little older. So going past the very basics, that basic literacy, which is defined as what they have to know in K-5, we start to move up into the middle school. And this is where most people who are teachers start to really feel lost. They don't know how to read the standards, much less how to teach this to the kids necessarily as you start to edge up above that base. So these are 6th, 7th, and 8th grade standards that are in the Maryland Computer Science Standards. So it's 6th grade to identify existing cybersecurity concerns and the devices that are connected to the internet and the systems that it uses. Most people don't know how to start a conversation on that. In 7th grade, to talk how to protect different things digitally and other ways. And then 8th grade to actually evaluate some different security measures and discuss the impacts of the things that people have done, as well as ethical and legal types of things. So we need actual resources when we start getting into the middle school level of what people are expected to know. This is the high school as it kind of lifts itself up here. All our high schools are required to offer a computer science class, but they're not required to have cybersecurity as part of that class, although most of the districts are saying they are interested in including some aspect of cyber in what they're offering to the kids. So you can see that in 10th grade and 12th grade, because they only did 10th and 12th in high school, there is no 9th or 11th grade set of standards. They talk about, different aspects of both ethical things and data protection. Thoughts, comments? Looks like fun. Can't wait to teach it. So the other thing we have to prepare people for is to pass that praxis exam. And the praxis exam is kind of all over the place with some basic knowledge and little spires of specialty knowledge that people have to have. And so this is a list of what we need to give to teachers or to give to pre-service new teachers to pass this exam that shows that they have mastered the concepts in computer science. So they need all those basics that we already went over in that K-5 space and in the middle school space. And they also need to be able to have an intelligent discussion about the trade-offs between what happens when you store things locally on a network in the cloud, the advantages, the disadvantages, to be able to answer questions on those. They need to know binary and how binary data is stored. I need a D on there. They also need to know hexadecimal, which I forgot to put on there. They need to understand what some of the different communication systems are, maybe advantages of Bluetooth, how that's different from Wi-Fi or whatever. The network security and web section, they need to know what the components are of a network, both what the pieces of hardware are and what the levels of abstraction are within a network. They need to understand the factors that impact the functionality of a network, including having a discussion about things like bandwidth, how much space you have to send the information, what the load is, what the latency is that slows it down. And they also need to know about different protocols, a fair amount about that. They need to know the simple stuff about basic security strategies. They need to know the classical 5 pillars of cybersecurity, and there's questions that seem to show up every time about some aspect of that, and they overlap so much that I get really confused. So I hope you do better on that. And they also need to know some things about the languages behind web pages and behind transfer of information, storage of information. So that's an overview of what they need to know to pass the praxis test. And you can see the link is down there. We're putting up study materials for the people who are working right now to pass that exam so that they can add the endorsement for computer science to what they already do. So what people are telling me they're calling cybersecurity are all of these different things. A lot of the classes that are easy to offer are the things that Cisco offers that might be targeted to specific hardware or a specific certification. Some people have materials that are about secure coding that often can be used after students have taken the higher level high school programming classes like the APCSA. They could certainly incorporate conversations about impacts, ethics, policy, legal issues into any subject area. Seems like it would be great if it was a part of social studies. NICIRC, who works with NICE, the National Institute for Cybersecurity Education, did come here and met with all the Maryland social studies leads for the districts and had a discussion about including something about cyber in the social studies pathway, but I never heard anything else about it. So if anybody hears anything following up on that, I'd love to know. It seems like there's a lot of options popping up now at the districts for these Internet of Things courses, cloud computing courses, web development courses, mobile app courses. Some people see that as being part of cybersecurity, and some of it is. There's lots kids can do with encryption and code breaking. That's lots of fun. That could be part of a math class or any other class. So the different pieces of what's in cybersecurity don't all have to fit inside of one cybersecurity course. If we're going to get an overall awareness, we have to figure out where to put all these different pieces. So right now, as it stands, both students and teachers, for the majority, don't have this background, don't know what most of these things are or how they work. And there's that whole wonderful